Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, March the 8th, 2022. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I will begin. Breaking news. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Poland turns over entire fleet of MiG-29 fighter jets to U.S. The authorities of the Republic of Poland, after consultations between the president and the government, are ready to deploy immediately and free of charge all their MiG 29 jets to the Ramstein Air Base and place them at the disposal of the government of the United States of America. At the same time, Poland requests the United States to provide Poland with used aircraft with corresponding operational capabilities. Poland is ready to immediately establish the conditions of purchase of the planes. Polish government also requests other NATO allies, owners of MiG-29 jets, to act in the same vein. Why Poland has come down on the side of the Banderites is an interesting question. Kane comments, if Poland sends MiGs, then NATO is at war. I'm going to go to an essay here by Eugippius at his Substack. And you have noticed that I have quoted this German fellow, many times with regard to COVID-19. But of course, you know that disease that was going to kill the whole world? And we had to shut down the whole world? Well, apparently nobody cares about that anymore because it just sort of went away. Funny how that works. He writes, some have asked for my thoughts on Ukraine. Since 2014, the Ukraine has been experiencing a quiet civil war between the Ukrainian majority in the West and a Russian minority concentrated in the East. The ethnic Ukrainian side in this conflict has been co-opted by the supranational imperial monolith. This is the cadre of Western elites that determines political, medical, and cultural orthodoxy across the world. They control not only all major political parties in most Western countries, but also global international consortia from the United Nations to the World Economic Forum to the European Union to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Their goal is to further squeeze Russia by turning Ukraine, including the Russian-speaking eastern regions, into another political constituent of American globalism. To the Russians, many Russians, this is unacceptable. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the globalists descended upon Russia to rape and pillage. In the years after 2000, NATO expansion was used to hem in Russia along the Baltic. These were hard years, but Russia finally reasserted its sovereignty. Since then, the Western globalists have considered unaligned Russia to be their enemy, and they have adopted Ukraine as a convenient proxy against her. Ukraine is useful for this purpose because it has considerable strategic significance, whether as a gateway to Russia through the open Ukrainian plains or as a staging ground for American missiles. Eugippius continues, the same Western globalists who hate Russia also count us as their enemies, and my sincere advice is to take them seriously in this. They have a kind of myopia for internal political dissidents. We are the unaligned domestic element. Russia is the unaligned international element. And so when Donald Trump is elected to the presidency, this must be for them the result of Russian interference. I keep calling these people American or Western globalists, but that's only one way to understand them. I don't have anything against Americans, Eugippius writes. I lived there for many years and have a great many American friends. It is only an historical accident, probably, that America finds itself at the center of this globalist excrescence, this post-political, post-national order. Rolf Peter Zieferle, one of my favorite thinkers, wrote about the fundamental conflict between the globalists on one hand and the unaligned people like me and unaligned countries like Russia in more abstract terms. For him, the clash is between politics and system. Quote, politics belongs to an older stratum of existence, ordered in terms of the state and of history, crystallized in statesmen, leaders, and ideologues. It has programs, values, and goals. What is required are virtues and commitments directed towards a superordinate whole. The last resort of politics is war, the willingness of the individual to sacrifice himself for a higher cause, for his community. System characterizes newly emerging orders of higher complexity, which successively displace politics. Systems organize themselves without focus, without values, goals, or programs. Their only maxim is freedom and emancipation for individuals. Virtue and sacrifice are anachronisms. Wars are nothing but catastrophic conflicts that must be prevented through skillful management. Order is created by objective, autonomous constraints, not by a normative orientation. The structures of systems are as inescapable for individuals as a magnetic field is for iron filings. They do not know anything about it, but they conform to their predefined paths. The most important processes are not controlled and can hardly be grasped theoretically. System has largely prevailed in advanced Western countries, yet the rest of the world in many ways still thinks politically. This strikes the West as anachronistic fundamentalism, unquote. Eugippius comments, the system globalists don't recognize the legitimacy of Russian strategic interests or the legitimacy of anybody's strategic interests. Globalists do not have security concerns in that way. Many of them even believe their own hollow rhetoric that they are spreading freedom and democracy, even after these last 2 years of experimentation in forced vaccination and intermittent mass house arrest. Even if they don't believe all of that about democracy, they nevertheless imagine that they are missionaries of light and goodness to all peoples everywhere, and that human potential will only fully be realized when every last Russian is on Facebook and subscribed to Amazon Prime. The global American empire doesn't invade. That is not what systems do. It assimilates. It is basically a Borg that imposes economic and political constraints on an ever-expanding expanse of the globe, which progressively fatten, distract, and deracinate populations with a view towards blending them into the same shallow multinational consumerist soup. Their plan was to make Ukraine part of the Borg and in this way further encroach upon Russia. Russia responded in political fashion by taking up arms. Because the Western Borg never knows when to stop, Ukraine will now be destroyed and probably partitioned as a means of keeping it forever outside the Western globalist fold. However much the globalists like the idea of encircling Russia with NATO, in their saner moments, they're not actually willing to risk nuclear war to defend the easternmost reaches of Europe. For the globalists, Ukraine was just a pawn. After they finish throwing their tantrum, they'll go pick another proxy fight somewhere else and ruin some other country, and they'll also continue to grind away at unaligned, unassimilated internal dissidents within their borders too. They make no distinctions here. Western media and politicians don't want to explain the cause of the Ukrainian war because it is a defeat that they brought upon themselves. This is why they have chosen instead to portray Putin as some kind of crazy lunatic in the mold of a Kim Jong-un or a Saddam Hussein. That is precisely wrong. Those are unpredictable tin-pot dictators who command paper tiger armies. The Russians are a nuclear-armed global force, and the Ukrainian war is not something that Putin himself dreamed up yesterday. It surely enjoys substantial support within the Russian political and military establishment. Eugippius concludes, so now that I've angered some of you, nothing in the above is at all original. A lot of people from John Mearsheimer to Noah Chomsky to a late 1990s Joe Biden have made similar observations. I think there is little room for original thought. When it comes to the major events of global politics, most of what is happening becomes obvious as soon as you step outside the crazy media framing and observe things as they are. And I should mention, this went rather viral a couple of days ago, that someone found old video of Joe Biden speaking to the Russians a few years ago, when he's still a senator. And the Russians were warning that if you keep slapping us down, if you won't let us in, then we will have to choose China. And Joe Biden's immortal response, good luck with that. Famous last words, perhaps. Jim Kunstler's column yesterday is called Nowhere Left to Hide. Time, they say, is nature's way of making sure that everything doesn't happen at once. If that's so, then maybe time has stopped because all of a sudden everything seems to be happening at once. Three things, actually. One, a Russian military operation in Ukraine that a lot of people in America want to turn into World War III. Two, an epic crack-up of the world financial system. And three, the breakdown of the fishy COVID-19 affair, and especially the story behind its holy avatar, the mRNA vaccine. In a sane society, that might be enough to trip the institutional reality test apparatus, but we are not a sane society these days. So we plunge ever deeper into a hurly-burly of wrongful endeavor, vectoring toward self-destruction. The immediate problem is a nation, us, that is powerfully bamboozled, led by a figurehead nobody believes in, backed by a hidden coterie of actors who appear to hate our country enough to try to sink it. Kunstler continues, forgive me for restating the premise of the Ukrainian situation, but one must counter the propaganda emitted like poison gas by a perfidious news media. Russia objected to the expansion of NATO to its very border based on long-standing prior agreements about it. Joe Biden had every chance to formally recognize that reality and stupidly demurred. The Ukrainian government ditto. Our side, the USA, had already created enough mischief there in mounting the 2014 coup against a government friendly with Russia and then arming its replacement to harass Ukraine's own citizens in its easternmost provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk. 2 weeks ago, Russia moved in forcefully to correct all that. After all, Ukraine had been a part of Russia since they wrested it from the Ottoman Empire in the 1700s, and in any other sense, Ukraine is within Russia's sphere of influence as such things are defined in geopolitical history. The US-led response to the Russian op was an attempt to dismantle the complex interbank payment systems of the global economy in order to punish one region, Russia, of the global economy, that is cutting off your leg to punish yourself for walking into harm's way. The result of that now is mayhem in the financial markets and in currencies, with global commodities such as grain, oil, and ores acting as hostages. This hostage taking has far-reaching effects because the nations of the world cannot operate without food, energy, and stuff to make products out of. Interfere with the rational distribution of them, and you'll get chaos and death. Kunstler continues, financial markets are averse to threats of chaos and death. These conditions tend to interfere with formal promises between parties to service loans, which is the basis of finance. If finance destabilizes badly, standards of living plummet, and pretty soon people are stuck being hungry in the cold and dark, which is the opposite of being happy and civilized. So maybe jamming an I-beam into the machinery of global finance isn't the splendid idea it seemed a few days ago when the geniuses behind Joe Biden swung into action pretending to be superheroes fighting an imagined nemesis, standing by to see how all that works out. Then there is the resolving picture of all the mysterious puzzle pieces in the COVID-19 story. Sunday night, America's premier propaganda vessel, CBS's 60 Minutes, ran a puff piece on the CDC starring the warm and fuzzy mom figure, Rochelle Walensky. It is hard to overstate just how dishonest the segment was, starting with its subtle effort to keep America in a state of alarm. New variants coming, proceeding to a deceptive cartoon of how the mRNA so-called vaccines work wonders. White memory cells patrol the body. No mention of spike proteins. And concluding with exhortations for Americans to continue vaxxing and boosting up, despite an avalanche of news coming from elsewhere than 60 Minutes about the CDC withholding critical information from the public it's supposed to serve throughout the 2-year-plus crisis, not to mention new data from alt media on extensive injury and death rates among the vaccinated, including shocking info from the court-ordered recent release of Pfizer's own records. Was this 60 Minutes segment corporate media's attempt to cover up the emerging crimes of America's public health agencies in concert with pharma and media itself? That is, to get ahead of the story, as has lately been the strategy for all the cable channels and legacy newspapers, with more and more citizens asking themselves if they have been played. Meanwhile, the big kahuna of COVID-19, one Dr. Anthony Fauci, has gone to ground, made himself scarce, skipped the scene, vamoosed amid all the new controversy. Word has apparently come down from on high in the party of chaos that his ubiquitous puss on the nation's flat screens is no longer helping to sell the Max Vax directive. Too many people perhaps suspect that I can't say that. to happen in the first place and then botched his attempt to play savior over it. Kunstler continues, it would be a pity for the party of chaos, it starts with a D, and its accomplices in the COVID frauds if the events playing out in Ukraine actually concluded with a reduction of danger and chaos in that corner of the world. It is surely the last thing they want. If the possibility exists that Russia will pacify the country, disarm it, neutralize its most corrupt and obdurately degenerate factions, and set it up as a properly governed backwater that will not threaten to upset the peace of the world again for some time ahead, then the spotlight will be back on the COVID crime against humanity and the folks who perpetrated it. And there will be nowhere for them to hide, especially with financial markets crashing down on their ears. Let's go to the chat. And hello to Burton Sultanoff, Zen Master Football Analysis, Contra Co, Anman, Dan, William Hicks, Paul Casso 88. Anman says the puppet masters may be mad, but evil is the better word. Hello to Old Major and David the Gnome. Well, who likes the eye patch? Golly, we're coming on 3 weeks now. I have, who was it? Was it Quachalango? Who suggested I greatly up my intake of vitamin C, which I have done, and it seems to be working. I'm about 50% less hideous than I was a week ago, but still too hideous to go without the eye patch. Hello to David Wright, who says atomic scientist doomsday clock set 100 seconds to midnight, closest ever. Hannity and company stoked. Urban Planner says, notice how Syria was a civil war, but Ukraine for the past 8 years has been a conflict. Hello to Buddy and Duvid. Hello to British American. Hello to Halper. Buddy says, what's the over-under and how many days till all of us become crispy critters? What's at the back of this? Yes, globalism. Yeah, of course. Neoconservatism. I've been wondering about neoconservatism for decades, and as I said before, I became convinced that it was a mystery religion. But what is the nature of its mystery? It's a death cult. That's what it is. Would these people really be willing to blow up the world out of peak boredom? The imp of the perverse? Could be. William Hicks says, so I'm in Florida, staying in a motel with 13 channels of, bad stuff on the TV to choose from. Saw an announcement that is International Women's Day, watching TNT. General KMG lost the battle of the shoelaces, says David Wright. Yes. Rockports. Yeah. These Rockports tripped me up. Someone said in the chat the other day that apparently Rockports are rather well known for the laces coming undone. If you are married, I'm afraid to inform you, every day is Women's Day, says Buddy. Victoria Newland. Yeah, let's go to Victoria Newland here. Of course, as you probably know, Victoria Newland is the maniac and neocon wife supreme who was responsible for the coup against the duly elected government of Ukraine in 2014. And she famously said on a hacked call, F the EU, because America was going to decide who was going to lead that country. Now, you may have heard Ukraine has biological weapons facilities, conspiracy, disinformation. But wait, they're talking about it in the U.S. Congress now. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post Millennial. On a Tuesday, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland told the Senate that the U.S. is working with Ukraine to protect biological research labs as Russia continues its attack on the Eastern European nation. But wait a minute, they don't have biological research labs, but they do. And apparently that's a good thing. Ukraine has biological research facilities, which in fact we are now quite concerned Russian troops, Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of these research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach. Nuland told the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee in a hearing, golly, wouldn't want the Russians to find out what the Americans have been doing via their Ukrainian puppet could be embarrassing. The response came in regards to a question from Senator Marco Rubio, who asked, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons? Following Nuland's response, Rubio continued to ask whether she would have any doubt that the Russians would be behind any potential biological or chemical attacks. I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda, boo, two groups already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country, and with NATO's coordination, if there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or an attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it? Rubio asked. There is no doubt in my mind, Senator. And it's a classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves. Nuland responded, projection.txt. And of course, Nuland also said that she is working with tech companies to remove disinformation on the internet about Ukraine. Marco Rubio is an absolute clown. I mean, there's a lot of stupid people, men and women in the United States Senate. But he is not only stupid, he is highly dangerous. Yes, and the return of Victoria Nuland. Pedro Gonzalez, more from him later, said people like Victoria Nuland made this war inevitable and have blood on their hands. Oh, yes, we also work with the tech companies to try to take down false stories, and we are working very assiduously on all that now, she told the Senate. So what's going on here is that Marco Rubio is putting forward what they call a legend in the intelligence community, that if anything bad happens, because there are apparently 9 biological weapons facilities in the Ukraine overseen by the U.S. government, anything bad happens, well, of course, it's Russia doing it deliberately. Not that the deranged oligarch Zelensky, who wants World War III, no, he'd never do anything like that. Clint Ehrlich tweets, I'm aware that the existence of the biolabs was public. What Russia alleged was that the U.S. and the Ukraine were pursuing research at the labs on dangerous biological agents. The testimony of Victoria Nuland just made that accusation more credible. Again, it's as Michael Anton says, that thing isn't happening, but it's good that it is. Lionel Media comments, only in America can Victoria Nuland know that what she says as to anything and everything regarding Ukraine will not be picked up or commented on by American sock puppet media because of 2 reasons. They are ordered not to, and they have no idea who she is. Well, perhaps people will learn who she is. British American says, is this entire Russia-Ukraine war and willingness of Kamal to literally start World War III a cover? Because they know they are being found out. Read the long coup versus Trump. Yes. Well, okay. I'm sure the Ukraine has much, much interesting information about Hunter Biden and, John Kerry's family and all the other hegemons. And their children somehow end up working for Ukrainian gas companies. Golly. Who could have seen that coming? Who could have seen that coming? Hello to Quechulango. Yeah, how about those biolabs? Hello to respectable commenting name. David Wright, did you ever get the feeling that we in America are the real targets of this war? Yes, I have definitely got this feeling. The Great Reset, you've heard so much about it. Now you're seeing it in action. We had a milder phase where Jeff Bezos and people like him got ever so rich, because why do you need to go to stores anymore? No. Amazon can just deliver everything you need. Going out, socializing, meeting other people, even meeting other people, that's not necessary. Hello to Ty Anthony, which is a new name to me. Ukraine should have the ability to determine their allies without getting invaded under pretext of evil nationalist Nazis. Well, the Nazis are there, okay? They are there, and they have been funded by oligarchs. Hello to Phlegmaticus, who says there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Hello to Professor Jonathan Paul, Can we get an update on your situation with your teaching job? Hello to My Trail of Disgrace. And William Hicks says that dialogue with Newland and Rubio reminds me of Fauci and Stephanopoulos. Scripted much? It's like a cheap infomercial. 1995 plus tax. Operators are standing by. KMG, when is the Bowie biopic on Matinee Monday? They're doing a Bowie biopic? They've done one? Did they, is this a situation where they weren't allowed to use any of his music? I'll look into that. Chokin666 says, never has an oligarchy been so dedicated to making life unpleasant for its citizenry. I don't know. Perhaps we've seen nothing yet. Here's a piece from The Remnant, which is an excellent Catholic newspaper. And it's an essay from Archbishop Vigano, former apostolic nuncio to the United States. And the editor of The Remnant notes, this morning I received an urgent email from His Excellency Archbishop Carlos Maria Vigano asking us to give top priority to his message on the crisis in Ukraine. In the Russia-Ukrainian crisis, the Archbishop writes, we must clearly recognize and denounce the coup d'etat of the deep state worldwide, which has worked to install the New World Order involving the WEF, NATO, UN, the European Union, the IMF. I could not agree more with His Excellency. This is indeed a geocritical moment, and that this discussion must move beyond the realm of Fox News and CNN if we are to bring anything constructive to the de-escalation of this crisis. If this issue is not addressed with integrity and objectivity, Vigano cautions, there is a real risk that the Biden administration will take advantage of this crisis, of which Joe Biden himself is an accomplice and responsible. There is also a real risk, His Excellency continues, that the crisis will serve to cover up Biden's crimes, those of his son Hunter, the China virus pandemic, the Durham investigation, the what happened in 2020, which I'm not allowed to say here, as well as jeopardizing the midterm elections in the United States. As the world finds itself on the brink of World War III, a war orchestrated by a globalist cabal and headed up by the likes of Klaus Schwab, George Soros, and Team Biden, I urge readers to prayerfully reflect on this message from His Excellency. The truth, Vigano reminds us, is the foundation of justice and peace. Let us all therefore ask God to help us find and defend the light of that truth in this moment of Luciferian darkness. And you can find that at Remnant, the newspaper.com. Every time Rex Murphy posts an essay in the National Post, which is once a week, the Twitter goes crazy with people melting down. Apparently, we can't have one person speaking out against the narrative in Canada. You may have heard that Justin Trudeau visited London, and he was heckled so ferociously on Downing Street that he had to enter the Prime Minister's residence via the back way. Justin Trudeau, not much or frequently given to philosophizing on world affairs, recently gave an address to the Ukrainian community in Etobicoke, Ontario. Inevitably, it was about Vladimir Putin's savage war against Ukraine, and yet it had a perhaps unintended reference to our own country. The core of his musings came with some reflections on the world's democracies. He began by alerting his audience that, quote, we've come to a moment that, quite frankly, we've seen coming over the past few years, unquote. And what, pray tell, is that moment? It's the moment about democracies around the world in which we see a bit of a slippage in our democracy. This is an interesting description. Words are important, as Barack Obama once observed of Hillary Clinton, and these words are no exception. Nothing serious here for our democracies, just a bit of a slippage. Not a full tumble now, a head over heels moment, or a real fall, but merely a little skid. He then turned up the volume a bit and noted countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders. Donald Trump? Nah. Couldn't be Trump, because Trudeau would never have offered that slightly. I'll leave the choice to the reader, as Trudeau was not, and this was a bit of a failing specific. Next, he left the question of these slightly more unnamed authoritarian leaders without comment, and went on to him a more gravely worrisome sign of countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media. Murphy comments, there's a little puzzle here, maybe even a full contradiction. If these countries have tended to more authoritarian leaders, and it being the practice of authoritarian leaders to prohibit, ban, and outlaw what they don't like or want, then why are they allowing all this misinformation and disinformation in their slightly slipping democracies? And this leads to an even more pertinent set of questions. One such would be the distinction between mis and disinformation. Is there a distinction? For example, if a group of blue-collar workers fearing for their livelihoods and angry about not being consulted on policies key to their employment, would it be called racist and misogynist and a fringe minority holding unacceptable views and not to be tolerated? Into which category would that fulsome denunciation fall? Misinformation or disinformation? Further, these wildly overcharged descriptions were in fact allowed to be shared on social media. By whom? By Trudeau himself, for he was the author of half of them, and by some of his lead ministers. How did Trudeau respond to the protests? First, by refusing to communicate with the Canadian citizens who made up the protests. Second, by the first ever invocation of the Emergencies Act, which granted his government the power to arrest some of the protest leaders, seize their equipment, reach into their bank accounts, and find the names even of other citizens who donated to the protest. All this before, as the legislation allows, the Act's invocation had been confirmed by Parliament. Before the Freedom Convoy protest, the freezing of bank accounts in particular was something contemplated only under extreme conditions, such as when acts of terrorism were contemplated or executed. It is an astonishing power. It invalidates personal autonomy and pushes the citizen into utter dependence on the whim of the state. The final current in this Christmas cake of overreach came when the Emergencies Act made it to Parliament for confirmation. It got half a vote. The Commons, specifically the Liberals and the Ersatz Liberal NDP, voted for it. It never made it to a confirmation vote in the Senate. Trudeau revoked what he had invoked before he could. Now, there's a curiosity. The unprecedented deployment of near wartime powers had 9 days of exercise over the lives of Canadian citizens, reaching into their private affairs and their bank accounts, and it never received the confirmation of the full Parliament. What do you think? Was this a bit of a slippage? A bit of a slippage in one of the democracies, namely ours? Rex Murphy concludes Trudeau was dead on the money in much of what he said, except what we've been seeing during COVID and then the protest was far more than a bit of a slippage. And putting the whole country of Canada under the Emergencies Act to deal with a local and peaceful protest was more than slightly authoritarian. It was a full dive into both those waters. The only thing lacking in that speech was a mirror. Let's go to Rachel Gilmore of Global News, or the CSIS News Network, as I like to call it. Freedom Convoy forums find new focus: disinformation about Russia-Ukraine war. Well, according to Global News and Rachel Gilmore and pretty much the entire media of my country, as well as its government, disinformation is any view which dissents from the claim that Russia is entirely responsible for what has happened in the Ukraine, and that Russia is a terrible, terrible country who must get it in the neck. As the tire tracks fade from the so-called Freedom Convoy, and once again, we don't have editors because she has put Freedom Convoy in scare quotes and then put so-called in front of it. You just need one, you don't need both. That occupied downtown Ottawa streets. Some of the Telegram forums devoted to the convoy have taken up the torch of a new cause: Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How long before Telegram is banned in Canada? Much like the misinformation that fueled some of the trucks headed for Ottawa, conspiracy theories at the core of some of their conversations about Ukraine, leading them to decry Western intervention in the conflict. How is this misinformation? Or in some cases, express outright support for Russia. I fully support Russia, wrote one Telegram user in the channel titled Convoy to Ottawa 2022, which is just shy of 30,000 subscribers. Oh, so at least one of the 30,000 subscribers to this Telegram channel says, I fully support Russia. Well, QED. In another post on the channel, Russia addresses the Russian military. We, the Russian residents of Kiev, are waiting for you, but be careful. There are a lot of hostile people here and outright enemies and simply deceived by propaganda. That's an opinion. It's simply an opinion, but we're not allowed to have opinions anymore in Canada, at least according to Global News. It can be difficult, if not impossible, to ascribe motivations to the people participating in these forums, disinformation experts say. But one thing is clear, some pro-convoy forums have shifted from posting misinformation about COVID-19. Oh, you want to specify what misinformation they were posting about COVID-19? Posting misinformation about the Russia-Ukraine war. It is definitely a trend that is happening, said Carmen Celestini, who is a postdoctoral fellow with the Disinformation Project at Simon Fraser University. I mean, we can see images where they're posting pictures of the mall in Ukraine with a swastika in the background and sort of supporting this narrative of Putin's that he's denazifying Ukraine. Celestini was referring to an LED display at a Ukrainian mall that lit up with a swastika in 2019. The mall quickly took the image down and apologized, saying in a Facebook post that it had been hacked. Of course, it had been hacked. Yes. So, once again, if you don't believe that Putin is the most evil man in the world and must get it in the neck, you are guilty not only of misinformation, but disinformation. One very popular post circulating on both forums suggests that Putin is simply invading Ukraine in order to destroy US-run bioweapon labs in the region. Russia produces documents showing US-funded bioterror labs and Ukraine producing anthrax and plague, reads the headline of one article shared in the Global Freedom Convoy channel. Another user posts that in Ukraine since 2012, the US government has created dozens of biological laboratories. I think that's where COVID-19, I'm not going to repeat that. Now, when Russians are liberating these laboratories, a lot of interesting things come up. The disinformation about US bioweapons manufacturing has been debunked. Oh, perhaps she should have a little talk with Victoria Newland. The most popular disinformation that is spreading is that Ukraine is full with a bunch of Nazis, says Mary Blankenship, a University of Nevada researcher who looks at how misinformation spreads through Twitter. This is kind of how they're aligning themselves with Putin, because they're making the statement that Canada's government is filled with a bunch of Nazis and is suppressing these people, and at the same time are supporting Nazis in Ukraine. They are. The Canadian Armed Forces trained the Azov Brigade. This is a matter of fact. But where should people who want, the goods, the real goods on the Ukraine go? Well, according to Rachel Gilmore, that there are reliable sources that will tell you exactly what is happening there. And let's see, what's one of those reliable sources? According to a guru figure here, Mary Blankenship, who Rachel Gilmore is fond of going to, this is what Professor Blankenship says. Try to find the original source or look at news from local sources like Kiev Independent. Kiev Independent, eh? What do we know about Kiev Independent? Well, Michael Tracy tweeted, 2 days ago, knew there was something off about this guy. Here's Kiev Independent reporter Ilya Ponomarenko, who has gained almost 1 million followers in less than 2 weeks, declaring himself, quote, brothers in arms with the notorious openly neo-Nazi Azov battalion. And there is a tweet from April 22nd, 2019 by Ilya Ponomarenko. Brothers in arms. It was a fine day in August 2017 when Azov guys consecrated me, an artillery guy. Consecrated by Nazis. Yeah, but if you want to know what's really happening, read this admitted neo-Nazi in the so-called Kiev Independent, because they would never steer you wrong. How about National Public Radio? Non-existent Nazis in Ukraine, says Maria Dubovikova. You can see the portrait of Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera on the wall of the Konotop mayor. No wonder why he refers to humans as cockroaches. Yes, and there is, right behind his head, right behind his chair, is a large portrait of Stepan Bandera, which NPR PBS conveniently blurred because there are no neo-Nazis in the Ukraine. Mark Sloboda tweets, the US-backed Maidan Putsch regime has literal state-armed and funded neo-Nazi death squads as of Right Sector, C-14, etc., that it is sent to kill its own people in East Ukraine for 8 years to subjugate them to the 2014 seizure of power in Kiev. Yeah, this is a fact. This actually happened. But no. It is disinformation of the very worst kind to suggest that there are neo-Nazis, active and powerful neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, despite the fact that it is a fact admitted by Canada's Ministry of Defense that the Canadian forces trained the Azov Battalion. Clint Ehrlich has a tweet storm here. I've seen a lot of people complaining about their Twitter feeds being throttled by Twitter, and I have no doubt they're absolutely correct about this. Ehrlich writes, the West thinks sanctions are hurting Putin. They have it backwards. His power inside Russia is surging, a thread on what analysts are getting so wrong. Objectively, Putin's poll numbers have improved since the lead up to an onset of the war. This was predictable. A rally round the flag effect is common for wartime presidents. In less than 2 weeks, his approval rating spiked 10 points from 61 to 71%. Many in the West are predicting that its effect will be short-lived. Analysts think that Russians will sour on Putin if the economic situation in the country continues to worsen. But there's a gaping hole in their theory. Russians don't think the war was Putin's fault. This is difficult for people in the West to understand. Here, we see the invasion of Ukraine as a war of choice. In Russia, the average citizen sees the conflict as a war of necessity, one forced onto Russia by NATO and Ukraine. This was confirmed before the war in research by the Levada Center, a non-governmental polling firm widely trusted in the West. More than 66% of Russians blamed the conflict on America, NATO, or Ukraine. Only 4% said the conflict was Russia's fault. Because Russians do not blame Putin was responsible for the war, they naturally do not blame him for sanctions. Citizens of the U.S. did not blame FDR for economic hardships like rationing during World War II. Russians have a similar perspective on wartime hardships today. If anything, the perceived cruelty of the current sanctions is making the West more of a villain in Russia. Some Russians I know who had favorable opinions of the West now feel like they are personally under attack. They resent being the targets of economic warfare. One of the most egregious examples is the attempt to block international calls into Russia. Today, many Russians overseas are having trouble reaching their families at home. This makes them angry, but not at Putin. It makes them hate the West. The Russians who were upset with Putin about sanctions are the ones who already opposed him. They were a vocal younger minority within the country. But the people attending anti-war marches are the same ones who previously were marching against corruption. Putin's base sees the Western pullout from Russia as an opportunity to purge the country of foreign influence. They like the idea of Western companies selling their stakes in state industries. They like replacing Western brands with Russian and Chinese substitutes. I'm not arguing that these replacements will be smooth. They won't stop Russia's economy from heading for a deep recession. But nationalist sentiments inside Russia now are so strong that it's a price Russians are willing to pay. The Kremlin is doing everything in its power to strengthen those sentiments. It's why within the last 2 days, it's alleged that the U.S. was funding secret nuclear and biological weapons programs inside Ukraine. And now we know that's true. Clint Ehrlich continues, in the West, these WMD claims were met with skepticism, but in Russia, they were widely believed. They reinforced the narrative that President Putin was forced to invade because otherwise Ukraine might use WMDs in a war to retake Crimea or the Donbass. The threat that Russia faces from Ukraine has been portrayed as the sequel to the threat from Nazi Germany, but this time with WMDs. And the crackdown on dissenting media voices inside Russia ensures that narrative remains unchallenged. It's easy to laugh at brainwashed Russians and mock the country as the new North Korea. For the sake of argument, let's assume that's true. Should the U.S. be proud of a foreign policy that has created a new North Korea with 6,000 nukes? If the goal of our policy towards Russia, Ehrlich concludes, was to make it a closed, paranoid society, mission accomplished. But we shouldn't pretend that any day now Russians feel the sting of our economic warfare and turn on their president. They are more likely to turn on us. And let's go to Spiked Online. Russians, they're bad. All of them are bad. Um, it's not an evil dictator. The Russians are responsible for their evil dictator. Every single one of them. So they all must suffer. Tom Slater writes, Russian artists are not the enemy. The cultural boycott of Russia has taken an ugly McCarthyist turn. Wartime frenzy and the arts world really do not mix. That's because abundantly clear in recent days as the understandable desire on the part of Western cultural institutions to show solidarity with Ukraine and express their disgust with Vladimir Putin has morphed into knee-jerk censorship, hysteria, and flat-out Russophobia. As Russian forces rolled into Ukraine, a cultural boycott of Russia emerged almost immediately, informally, before anyone could get around to campaigning for or organizing one. Russia has now been cut off from swaths of Western cultural output, while Russian artists working in the West have found themselves sacked and ostracized. Almost every sphere of culture has been caught up in this. The examples range from the shocking to the absurd. Hollywood movie studios have pulled out of the Russian cinema market entirely. Western artists have suspended exhibitions of their work in Russia. ITV has pulled I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here from the Russian airwaves. EA Sports is busy expunging Russian teams from its FIFA video games. And Russian artists and organizations have had contracts terminated and performances canceled across Western countries. These cultural boycotts are at once self-flattering, discriminatory, and completely counterproductive. Last week, Disney pulled all its theatrical releases from Russia, swiftly followed by Warner Brothers and Sony. The new Pixar flick, Turning Red, was among the first releases to be affected. On the one hand, the idea that stopping Russian children from watching a film about a teenage girl who turns into a giant red panda when she's stressed could shift the dial in Ukraine's favor is ridiculous. On the other, it treats even the most innocent of Russian citizens as tainted by the actions of their government, burnishing the Kremlin line that the West simply hates Russia and its people. I understand why pop stars are canceling tour dates in Russia and why outspoken artists are wary of performing in a country that is taking an increasingly totalitarian turn, its government scrambling to keep the truth about its brutal war from its people, with Western citizens and journalists fleeing the country for fear of state reprisals or being trapped within its borders. Even getting into Russia will be incredibly difficult, not to mention unwise for some time to come. But the idea that Russian audiences should, on principle, be sealed off from Western culture for the foreseeable future risks ushering in an unpleasant new era. Perhaps the worst excesses of this boycott have been witnessed in the West. A McCarthyist move has swept our cultural institutions. Star soprano Anna Neptrenko has been ousted by New York's Met Opera over her close links to Putin and past associations with pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. She has issued a statement denouncing the war, but when the Met asked her to denounce Putin specifically, she refused and was sacked. Conductor Valery Gergiev, a close friend of Putin, has been sacked by the Munich Philharmonic under similar circumstances. He was also issued with an ultimatum: denounce the invasion or pack up your batons. Both were essentially told to take a loyalty oath, their silence taken as proof of their guilt. It gets worse. Russian filmmaker Kirill Sokolov has family in Ukraine. He has backed online petitions against the invasion, and yet he has still had his new film, No Looking Back, dropped by the Glasgow Film Festival, all because he, like many other filmmakers the world over, has received funding from his government. Then there's Alexander Malofeev, a 20-year-old Russian pianist who has had a performance canceled in Vancouver. He has no links to Putin and has said nothing about the war when his performance was pulled. That, as it turns out, was the issue. Lila Getz, artistic director of the Vancouver Recital Society, said she could not in good conscience present a concert by any Russian artist at this moment in time unless they are prepared to speak out publicly against this war. Getz later said that the cancellation was due to concerns for Malofeev's safety, but as her original statement readily conceded, denouncing the Russian government is hardly risk-free for Russian citizens at the moment either. Just ask the thousands of brave Russians who have been beaten and arrested for protesting against the war. And we see that Norman Lebrecht, he thinks Anna Nemtrenko, he doesn't like Anna Nemtrenko. She's a nasty person, a nasty diva. And Gergiev apparently is beyond the pale. And a kind of a piece by Kelly Jane Torrance in the New York Post was attacked by Lebrecht because apparently she is not anti-Putin enough, which is pretty amusing if you've read her stuff. She's very anti-Putin indeed. boasting that she had never gone on RT, even though asked, and she counseled everyone who had been asked to be interviewed by RT not to do it because it is not worth losing one's soul. Golly. Let's look at the hysteria from the Drudge Report. All in, Putin bets presidency. RT anchor quits, warns world on brink of nuclear war. As Russia military stumbles, adversaries take note. Soldiers desert posts after heavy losses. This is beginning to, these stories that one reads about the 1939 in Europe. Oh, the Germans, they're just a paper tiger. Did you hear about a fellow I knew, or a fellow I knew told me that someone he knew told him that a driver in Germany wasn't paying attention and he happened to crash in through a bunch of German tanks, and it turns out they were made of cardboard. That's what all this reporting sounds like to me. Officer complains about dead general, comms meltdown. Now it's no mercy. Ukrainian soldiers vow. Using stealth drone fleet called the Punisher. Ukraine to get NATO jets. USA bans Russian oil. Nuke concerns rising. Golly, I wonder why nuke concerns would be rising. Huh? Drudge Report. And let's look at a digest of headlines from antiwar.com. Zelensky ready for talks on Crimea, Donbass. Newland reveals U.S. biological research facilities in Ukraine, but they don't exist. She's admitting something that doesn't exist. Ukraine's videos of captured troops could violate a Geneva Convention. Yes, we're going through this again. Do you remember after 2001? These sissies talking about the Geneva Convention. They don't understand the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention isn't to protect them, it's to protect us. That's why it exists, to prevent mutually assured destruction. Poland ready to give jets to U.S. for Ukraine. Biden bans U.S. imports of Russian oil and gas. Temporary ceasefire mostly holds in Sumy, allowing evacuations. Orban signs decree allowing NATO troops in Western Hungary. U.S. allies sending arms to Ukraine from secret Eastern European airfield. Blinken says NATO is considering more permanent troops in Baltics. Israeli DM urges world to mobilize against Iran. Iran nuclear talks unclear as Russia issues demands. Yeah. And, the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail has been absolutely hysterical. Britain is not a military power. It's not a world power. It can't even protect its own shores from invasions of people from the Middle East and Africa, but they are acting oh so tough. Poland offers to give all of its U.S. all of its MiG-29 fighter jets, but will it make America a target for Moscow and dramatically escalate conflict? It seems to be what you want. U.S. official warns a cornered Russian leader. Oh, he's cornered, is he? Could use small nukes on Ukrainian cities in worst case scenario after Kremlin officials privately denounce Putin's. Yeah, I'm not even going to repeat that. With his forces bogged down in snow and -4 freeze on the way. Previously, we're told that the temperature was too warm, and that was disastrous for Russian tanks and troops. Now, apparently, it's too cold. Well, pick a side. Fuel expert warns Americans to conserve gas as Ukraine war pushes average prices to $4.17, the highest in U.S. history, with one gas station in California charging $7.59 a gallon and warnings that prices won't fall until November. Why November? How would they know that? Pressure mounts on KFC to shutter its 1,000 Russian restaurants as McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, and Pepsi all halt business there indefinitely over Ukraine invasion. Yeah, I don't know. Glass half full, glass half empty. I remember years ago when I was a radio producer, I was speaking to an American that I was going to have on the show that I produced. And so I forget the context of this, but Burger King came up. And he said, "Y'all have Burger King up there?" And I said, "Yes," tersely, because in the back of my mind was, we're not savages, But afterwards, I thought, what difference does it make whether we have Burger King in Canada or not? Aren't countries allowed to have their own food outlets? Must we have a unipolar world where everyone eats the same thing? Yeah, that's the dream, apparently. That is the dream. And now the Russians are being exiled from that dream, a dream that some people see as a nightmare. But let's go to the Twitter feed, Russians with Attitude at RWA Podcast. And what's the latest? A current Donbass map situation there, where the Ukrainian troops have been in a cauldron for several days. Main events today: Izium appears not to be under Russian control yet, but assaults continue. Russian forces moving on Nikolaev from three sides. All western suburbs of Mariupol taken. More forces moving on Kiev. Gains on the Lugansk direction. Main sieges paused for evacuation. Taking the W for not repeating the unconfirmed reports that Izium is under full Russian control, by the way. And Ukrainians counterattacked at Izium and Balaklia today, probably to try and get the Russians off of M03 and R78. It demonstrates these were positions they particularly did not want to lose. There may be more days like today with pushes by LNR DNR as Ukrainian shifts forces against Russia. And let's go to another Twitter feed, which again attempts to provide, news on this situation, as opposed to, Russia like 3 days away from complete collapse, that sort of thing. This is the ASB News, ASB Military Twitter feed. And they both took calls from Putin. And who would the both be? Clearly, alliances are being drawn for the coming conflict. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates declined Biden's phone calls and refused to speak with Biden about countering Russia and containing a surge in oil prices. Well, clearly, Biden is going to say, you have to sell us as much oil as possible at a much lower price than you can get. And why would it be in Saudi Arabia's and the UAE's interest to do that? Definitely wouldn't be in their interest. And Coca-Cola leaves Russian market, and ASB comments defatification. There is an awful lot of interest in this Victoria Nuland story, at least on Twitter. You can't cancel Putin, says Kat Rosenfield at unheard.com. Hurting the president's feelings won't end the war. We cannot just witness these atrocities and do nothing. It's a statement that resonates, the kind of thing you'd expect to hear from those we empower to keep the peace, NATO, the UN, our leaders. But this solemn vow to do something came not from a government official, nor a global peace organization, but from the International Cat Federation, which last week announced that cats bred or owned by Russians would be barred from competition henceforth. It was a decision that made headlines around the world. Some criticized it, some heartily approved, but everyone who engaged with that story had one thing in common: they clicked. After all, what else were they going to do? In other ways, filling the void with viral videos and Ukrainian flag emojis, finger wagging everyone else for being insufficiently engaged or somber or whatever. We may not be on the ground in Ukraine, but we're on the front lines of the accessory culture war, fighting our common enemy with the only weapon we've got: cancellation. Yeah, I like that formulation. The only weapon we've got: cancellation. Once again, that was Kat Rosenfield at unheard.com. And I mentioned Pedro Gonzalez, who is an editor at Chronicles magazine. And let's go to his Twitter feed. And what's the latest there? O'Connell on Ukraine aid, where we've ended up is at $14 billion. It needs to be passed, and it needs to be passed quickly. Yes, America's going to borrow $14 billion to send to the Ukraine. They might as well just burn the money for all good it will do. But of course, so much of it comes back via people like Hunter Biden and members of the military industrial MIC and complex and all of the hard working PR spivs. Gonzalez comments, these Republicans do not deserve your vote or your money. They literally care about every other country more than America. CNN, Greg Price of CNN tweets, people we've spoken to over the last couple of weeks are okay with paying higher gas prices if it means holding Russia accountable. I don't believe this. Gonzalez comments, people close to people told us that sources say people suggested they were fine with this. Yes, indeed. So we've heard about high gas prices in America. The prices are even higher where I live. Of course, I do live on an island, kind of at the end of the world, or at least as far west as North America gets. I mean, if you don't count Alaska. Gas price hits 2.169 cents a liter in Greater Victoria. This is a record, all-time record price. And what does that mean? In American, it means $6.41 a gallon. That is pretty stiff. Pretty stiff. The Columbia Bugle tweets, Lindsey Graham and the rest of America's warmongers plan to turn Ukraine into another Afghanistan, a bloody decades-long quagmire to distract Russia. It's hard to believe that's what the Ukrainian people want. Oh, Max Harold at CTV tweets, Montreal Symphony Orchestra drops Russian piano prodigy from concerts amid backlash. Gonzalez comments, a lot of Westerners are living life from one hysteria to the next, each stupider than the last. Now, the popular pianist Valentina Lisitsa is, her people come from the eastern Ukraine, and she has been quite vocal on her support for her people, which back when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister of Canada, got her canceled from a gig with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, which I'm sure was not the result of Stephen Harper or Jason Kenney saying, no, you are not allowed to have this horrible, horrible woman perform with your symphony. I'm sure, you know. I see that Valentina Lisitsa's Twitter feed is now protected. This is from Jordan Boyd at The Federalist. Biden plans to ban Russian oil imports, but buy it from Moscow's allies instead of producing it at home. Well, plausible deniability, I think they call that. And who else do we have here? Oh, I've been talking about lies. Ukrainian lies of people who support the Ukraine, and they're just absolutely endless. But Pedro Gonzalez put them all together, or as many as were current, in an essay on his Substack yesterday. World War Reddit, propaganda and its consequences in the Russian-Ukraine war. Every conflict brings to bear propaganda, but the volume of misinformation, the speed at which it has been concretized into truth, and the political cultural complicity of our elites in its promulgation during the Ukraine-Russia war are unprecedented. And though Russia is notorious for propaganda, the vast majority of West-facing misinformation in this conflict has poured out of Ukraine. On the one hand, Russian efforts seemed aimed at the Russian people to conceal the cost of the war from them for as long as possible and justify its continuation. That is not to say Russia does not have West-facing misinformation, but it appears concentrated on the image of the war at home. On the other hand, Ukrainian misinformation is pointed largely at the West, with outright propaganda promoted by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky himself. Ukraine's efforts are designed to bring the United States and NATO into the war. Sometimes it is subtle, other times it is unsubtle as a hammer hitting an anvil. This issue is a roundup of Ukrainian misinformation that has shaped the West's perception of the war. Apart from sheer volume and virality, it has been spread by state and non-state actors, by both Ukrainians and Westerners who are not officially engaged in the conflict. So what are the examples? Oh, the ghost of Kiev. Remember the ghost of Kiev? Supposedly, a Ukrainian ace had single-handedly downed several Russian fighters on his own, but the story was completely fake. There's no evidence that this person existed. Nevertheless, the meme went viral. Even Republicans, Dan Crenshaw and Adam Kinzinger, fell for the line. They were the first people that I would expect to fall for this. Military.com rationalized the propaganda to Americans, and the New York Times also issued an explainer on the matter. It's a good thing if good people are lying. Another people was the Snake Island massacre. Ukrainian soldier, Russian warship, go F yourself, and then they were blown to kingdom come and are now in heaven. These brave soldiers. Never happened. Never happened. George Weigel, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center who was a booster of the Iraq War, latched onto the event during an interview with the Catholic World Report. I should mention that George Weigel is an evil man. He's not just evil in the context of his heretical Catholicism. He is evil in that he is a neocon with who subscribes to a death cult. He said the defiance of Ukrainians defending a small island in the Black Sea before they were annihilated by a Russian naval vessel whose personnel demanded the Ukrainian surrender has inspired many Canadians and ought to inspire everyone who cherishes freedom. But it wasn't true, and we have the film of them surrendering and being fed, and then the Ukrainians admitted it. One captured soldier interviewed by reporters was surprised to learn about Zelensky's eulogy for him and his comrades. Another viral story appeared to show former Ukrainian beauty queen Anastasia Lena armed and ready to enter the fray. However, the images were actually old and featured toy guns. Lena said in a statement that she had not gone to the front lines. Video game footage from Arma 3 being used to show Ukrainians shooting down Russian planes. The clip, which is still online as of this writing, has more than 1 million views. And who else do we have here? Oh, yes, we have an Azov headquarters, which reporters told us was civilian occupied, which it was not, a legitimate military target. And it just goes on and on and on and on. Oh, Russians shooting at casualties. I warned right at the beginning of this, based on my experience with journalism, not to believe either side, not to believe anything they say. However, there's a difference in that many of the people, how should we say, pimping for the Ukraine in the West are being paid to do so. Oh, Ukraine president fighting on the front lines. Ukraine president inspecting border. Fake, 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 fake. And perhaps one of the most dangerous cases of genuine disinformation. On March the 1st, Zelensky claimed the Russians had bombed Babi Yar, a ravine in Kiev. It was also the site of massacres committed by the Nazis during World War II. Some 33,771 Jews died there. Zelensky's chief of staff reportedly confirmed that Russians bombed the site. The Ukrainian president's tweet has more than 300,000 likes and over 75,000 retweets. But on March the 2nd, Israeli journalist Ron Ben Yisha reported after touring the site that the memorial had not been destroyed or damaged, as Zelensky and his officials claimed. It's still up there on Wikipedia, I'm told. This outrageous falsehood. What is the point of this particular falsehood? It's that the Russians are the real Nazis. That is the point of so many of these stories. But hello to Don Willis, who cites Lynn Frankenstein Cheney. Oscar Toe says Dan Crenshaw sees Liz Frankenstein Cheney as a sexy pinup girl and the love of his life. Metal Mike says the propaganda is horrendous, but of course it is coming from both sides. Well, I would say that it's more horrendous on one side because Ukraine, especially its deranged oligarch, Zelensky, why would a common man, a man of the people, have secret offshore bank accounts? They want to drag us into this war. Gamian says, look up Freedom Gay Fetish Dance to know everything you need to know about whose puppet Zelensky is. It's pretty revolting. Well, I'm not going to look that up. I am not going to look that up. Metal Mike says Snoopy and the Red Baron have been seen duking it out over at the Ukraine. Wow, that takes me back to the mid-'60s, actually. Great sermon a while back. Come out of her, my people, exit the system. That's Don Willis says that. Hello to Pete Ferguson. Why is it? Oh, I'm going to be talking about Dickie Spencer shortly. Okay. Pedro is a Chad, says Oscar Toe. Biden. Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Quachalango says there is an old RWA interview with BAP from about a year ago. Pretty good. And he lets his fake accent down a bit, speaking with fellow East Euros. Hello to William Stewart, who says, I like our Harvey's chain up here. Harvey's was the first place that I ever saw anyone in my life eating poutine. This was around 1997. I was there with Colby Kosh, now with the National Post, and he ordered it, and this was, presented to him, and I had really half believed my whole life that poutine didn't exist, that it was the Quebecois trolling us, because I thought, who is going to eat that muck? But some people do. British American says, I really think that Russia's exquisite restraint in their conduct of this war has fooled a lot of neocons into thinking that there would be a pushover in any conflict with the U.S. NATO. Hello to Ty Anthony, who says the burger wars are here. Hang on just a second. Okay. Could be a little trouble next door, so I'll close the door. If Poland gives Ukraine jets, this will escalate, says Metal Mike. Again, I don't know. Yeah, they're standing with the disciples of Stepan Bandera, who loved killing Russians, but probably more, he loved killing Jews and Poles. David Wright commends Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire documentary. And Putin is gross, says Palcasso88. Putin rocks, says Don Willis. Respectable commenting name says KMG's distaste for Putin bodes ill for inviting him out for biscuits and gravy. Okay. And I talked about, gas prices. And, I want to talk about a video. And it's a video, okay. It's not going to let me do that. Hang on just a second. Is Klaus Schwab the most dangerous man in the world? That's what the video is called. And it's by a ginger man with long ginger hair and a beard. And he has a comedy channel, which has become increasingly political recently. It's still very funny. And it's called Awaken with JP. He has 2.3 million subscribers. And I highly recommend this video. Is Klaus Schwab the most dangerous man in the world? It is a real eye-opener. That of the World Economic Forum, it's just a conspiracy theory. These guys have no power at all. Well, they do. An awful lot of power. And they boast about it. But I think that the real most dangerous man in the world, and he is quite prominent in this video, is an Israeli called Yuval Noah Harari, who's written several bestsellers on history and the future, and he believes that free will is now surplus to requirements, and that we can hack bodies now. That we can hack bodies and get rid of this stupid idea that we have something called free will. So who is going to make our decisions for us? Well, I guess it would be the World Economic Forum, which of course has told us that by 2030, we will own nothing and have no privacy, and we will love it. Harari, I did some reading about him. He is a homosexual vegan because, of course, he is transhumanist. Anyone who identifies himself as a transhumanist is, he's literally saying that he is an enemy of humanity. But again, Awaken with JP. That's the YouTube channel, and he's got lots of stuff on there. I first came across some hilarious video that he made about, Elon Musk's electric car. and just ridiculous, consumption, conspicuous consumption. Oh, look, it's got video games in it. And of course, that's what you are looking for in a car, video games. Of course, cars have an unpleasant habit of catching on fire and blowing up. Let's look at Summit News. Paul Joseph Watson, Europeans panic buying iodine pills. Do you know why you'd buy iodine pills? For radiation poisoning. MSNBC race baiters hot take on Ukrainians. People only care because they're white Christians. And who would that be from MSNBC? That would be Joy Reid, the stupidest woman on television. War will cause hell on earth for global food prices. Video reporter refuses to accept not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki's attempt to blame Russia for gas price surge. A senior epidemiologist apologizes to daughter's generation for morally wrong lockdown measures. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Gas prices have surged to all-time highs and are now even more expensive than a fairly recent movie predicted they would during the apocalypse. Prices in areas of California have surpassed $7 per gallon as the national U.S. average price surged beyond $4 per gallon Sunday. As the images hit social media, people began to point out that the prices are higher than was predicted in the 2007 disaster movie I Am Legend, which suggested prices would reach almost $7 before society completely collapsed due to a rage zombie-type plague outbreak. This is really a dangerous situation. I'll explain why. Okay, freedom, we're not going to let you have freedom anymore. Okay, you can have license, but not freedom. Okay, not political freedom. We don't have room for that. It's hateful. It's hate speech. It's white supremacy, all that. Community, you can't have community anymore. Okay? Because we've moved beyond community. Families, you don't need families. The state is your family. Or if you're a trans person, you have your glitter families, right? Everything that was taken for granted until fairly recently, no. What do you get? What are you allowed to have? Stuff. You're allowed to have stuff. Some people can still afford cars. I don't know how many people are going to be able to afford cars in the near future. Now that people are being ordered back into work from home, these gas prices are going to be a serious problem for them. But of course, you've got electricity, you've got heat, which gives you the internet and free porn and all those wonderful things. Well, what if you can't afford your electricity anymore? What happens then? Because we are left with deracinated masses who have been atomized. But they've still got their stuff. They've still got their screens. What if the internet goes down? And again, well, what if you don't have the money to pay for that? What then? What then? Because we have taken people and we have left them with very little. And now we're saying, well, you have a responsibility to sacrifice what little you have, because we all have to stand in solidarity with the Ukraine, a country you'd never heard of until a week ago, and a country that you honestly don't care about. Stephen Colbert, oh yeah, these people whining about gas prices. Buy an electric car. There's very few, a minority of Americans has the means to buy an electric car. Well, I just junk the car that I have, buy an electric car, right? And then I can wait for the electricity for my Tesla. And oh boy, that's going to go through the roof, right? But yes, it is saying the quiet part out loud. These people have become so arrogant that they think they can do this. Gas prices. Why are you whining about gas prices? Stephen Colbert, how many millions of dollars a year is he paid? How many millions of dollars does he have in the bank? This crisis has revealed that conservatism has learned nothing in the last decade. Nothing at all. Rah, war. Let's go to war. Everyone loves war. right? Apparently, everyone loves trans peoples, or at least conservatives do. Matt Schlapp of the American Conservative Union, saluting the courage and the indomitability of that swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, who was breaking all these records because this swimmer was wrongly labeled a man at birth. But George Soros, he's everywhere. This is from Raheem Kassam at the National Pulse. The American Conservative Union, which hosts the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, took a six-figure donation from a leading left-wing fund for the purposes of, quote, civil rights, social action, advocacy, unquote, according to the fund's records dated 2020. The new venture fund, whose mission statement revolves around race, equity, diversity, and inclusion commitment, issued a cash grant of $183,250 to the ACU run by Matt and Mercedes Schlapp in 2020. The fund is known for its work supporting anti-Trump, anti-conservative initiatives. The ACU refused to comment when approached by the National Pulse. The new venture fund was started in 2006 and undergirds much of the political left's activities in America today. Its president, Lee Bodner, is a former managing director of Arabella Advisors, which even the Atlantic magazine described as a massive progressive dark money group, which has targeted former President Donald Trump, his administration officials, as well as issuing over $1 billion a year to left-wing groups and astroturfed political operations. Bodner is described as building strategic partnership with nonprofits, including the Clinton Foundation. Again, stop calling yourself conservatives. Where's the future leading? Well, apparently, no cash. Why would you want to use cash? Oh, because it's untraceable where you spend it? Well, why wouldn't you want the government and tech companies to know exactly how you spend your money, where and when? Do you have something to hide? This is Andrew Prentice at the Daily Mail. As Australian banks continue to focus on digital transactions for customers, ATMs and bank branches are disappearing across the country. The analysis revealed close to 460 bank branches have shut down across the nation in recent years, and dating back to 2020, approximately 3,800 previously active ATMs have been removed. New South Wales alone now has 140 fewer in-store banks, and almost 300 suburbs don't have a singular ATM to withdraw cash. It's a similar story in Victoria, where 120 branches have permanently closed their doors to customers. Closures have a devastating impact on local communities, finance sector union national secretary Julia Agressano said. Jobs are lost, business is impacted, and another local service disappears. Another key factor for the branch closures and reduced ATMs is the fact that banks are bringing in a small fortune from daily digital transactions. As Australia accelerates towards a cashless society, fees from either the customer or vendor for online banking have become commonplace. In a modern-day digital world, an estimated 80% of Aussies prefer to bank online, but the remaining 20%, namely the disabled or those who are not digital savvy, have been left stranded. Well, that's the goal. Bank branches. Why would anyone want a bank branch? Why would anyone want to use cash? Again, it's very suspicious. People using cash, probably money laundering involved. That's what the elite wants us to believe. And, Richard Spencer, the anti-poll star, is wrong about absolutely everything, but he does not repine. Now, if you had suggested that by 2022, that Richard Spencer's geopolitical views were essentially the same as David Frumm's, would anyone be surprised? Because that's where we are now. Apparently Richard Spencer is very excited by the new Batman movie because of course he will. And Richard Spencer is very angry at traitors. Yeah, that's right. Oh, and Richard Spencer on his Twitter feed, you've got the EU flag because everyone loves the EU, and then the Ukrainian flag. Glenn Greenwald had tweeted, "We're officially into the yes, this violates the Geneva Conventions, but phase of the war. That's never a good sign." And who is involved in this? Well, Julia Jaffe, but of course. I understand Geneva Conventions, but this man seems sincere and honest. And if more people in Russia seeing this wake up from their zombified state, the better. This shook me to my core. Once again, Julia Jaffe, the Soviet Union did not send us its best. Peter Jukes has tweeted, "I usually don't usually share POW pictures, but this is an extraordinary confession from a Russian soldier. It's important because it confirms absolutely the line Ukrainians are fascists was not only sold to Glenn Greenwald and the Putinist left, but to most Russians." Clara Jeffrey says, "Yes, it's against the Geneva Conventions to publicly display POWs, but this is something else entirely, in my humble opinion." And Richard Spencer is not moved by these appeals to the Geneva Convention because the Geneva Convention is for sissies. Spencer responded, "Greenwald utilizes every possible misinterpretation in apologizing for the Russian invasion. He demands that the invaded government follow the Geneva Convention to the letter, even when it's clear that the person in question wasn't harmed." Is it clear that he wasn't harmed? Yes. The Spencer convergence on Ukraine, and who is this? Antonium, I don't know, seems to have been driven by women in their lives. In Spencer's case, trolling his Russian ex-wife, and in Martinez's case, his conversion to Judaism for an ex-wife, which led him to embracing neocon foreign policy views. That's from David Pinson. Spencer tweeted, "One quality that defines right-wing Twitter is a complete allergy to engaging in dialectic. Ooh. Disagreements are articulated as cope much, seethe, or you're trolling your ex." Yes, as we know, Richard Spencer was married to a Russian woman, and it turned out that they had grave disagreements, that she just didn't like James Bond movies as much as she was supposed to. It's always tragic. It's always tragic when that happens. In all honesty, Spencer tweets, "My ex-wife did have a major effect on my attitude towards Putin and Russia in 2014, and as she remains a Russian ultranationalist, I've rethought a lot of my assumptions since then, and we're in a critical moment now, but I'm not trolling anyone." And okay, here we go. Across the Western media, a new traitors coalition has emerged in support of Russia. Dirtbag leftists and rightists, America First groypers, Q holdouts, LARPing traditionalists, ultra-magists, literal commies, and the occasional neo-reactionary and paleo-conservative. The system, okay. See, Richard Spencer, he stands alone, and he's always right. He's always right about everything. And I don't know. I suspect that many of these people, many of the people in Traitors Coalition are monotheists. And as we've learned from Richard Spencer, monotheism is just one of the worst, vilest, most dangerous forces in the world. Take that, Moses, says Richard Spencer. He continues, "The Traitors Coalition roughly tracks with those who either enthusiastically endorsed or apologized for January 6th. Some fellow travelers in this coalition, notably Trump himself and Tucker Carlson, have already backtracked and reversed their positions." Have they now? The Z emerged overnight as a curious symbol. Z is a Latin letter, not a Cyrillic one. Its meaning is cryptic, although its implications are not. It's hard not to see its similarities with Q. It is, in fact, the new Q. In itself, it means nothing, but it implies everything. What we see with these traitors is a coalition of the fringes. Richard Spencer is actually talking about the fringes. Basically, they hate everything, feel like they're under attack, sometimes for good reason, and see Russia as, in effect, assaulting, weakening, and humiliating the Western world. Before the New Left, Frankfurt School, etc., turned on the USSR, Russia existed as a fantasy realm for Western leftists and subalterns. Everything was free, work was good, racism and alienation were overcome, etc. Today, the Traitors Coalition might project similar fantasies onto Putin's Russia with a twist. Russia will be imagined as super trad, based, and religious, a land where every incel is mandated a girlfriend and e-girls are thrown into prison. The emerging digital iron curtain between East and West will only heighten the level of fantasy for the coalition of the fringes in the West. That is, they won't have any idea what life in Russia is actually like. As mentioned during the first Cold War, many subalterns, I don't know why he's using this military term, instinctively sided with the Soviets, perhaps merely out of resentment. This was, in fact, a major motivation, mostly unspoken, for policies like the Civil Rights Act and Great Society. What? In other words, the American system sought to integrate the subalterns so as not to lose them to communism and subversive practices. I doubt this process will repeat itself, says Spencer. Most highly educated non-white immigrants have Ukrainian flags in their bios. Oh, do they now? The Hispanic population will largely be indifferent or benignly pro-NATO in the coming conflict. Such people aren't an issue for the system. The system is more likely to crush or marginalize the Z people, much as it did to J6 and trucker convoy enthusiasts. The notion that it'll seek to work with them or that Russia will come to the Z's rescue is simply unthinkable. Z in the West simply cannot win. I understand their frustration, but how much sympathy should I have for people who are constantly seeking out new hills to die on, says Richard Spencer. How is that Richard Spencer actually has not been banned from Twitter? I suppose we can speculate. Freddie Magus at Twitter has a little gif from The Simpsons. You're absolutely glowing right now. Indeed, indeed. Graham Mateo responded, do you ever say anything that is not intended to divide us? Frank James predicts pronouns in bio incoming. White-pilled Ben says, I have had some good burgers in my time. I love a good Swiss, melted Swiss cheese and mushrooms, roasted mushrooms and caramelized onions on a burger. That is hot stuff. You can get that at a number of different places. The joke about burgers is it's a common Richard Spencer a joke. Max R.U. Vader says the reason I still come to your page is the fact that I still have respect for Richard. Of 2016 to 2018, he was really engaging in sacrifice and intelligent discourse. Since then, I wasn't totally antagonistic to your take on normie right until the Russia war. Yes. How long ago was it? 25 years ago, David Frum wrote a famous or infamous piece called Unpatriotic Americans. It's a little dodgy. It's a little difficult when someone, moves to the United States as an adult, as David Frum did, and takes the position, I'm more American than any of you. But Pat Buchanan and Robert Novak and Jude Wininski and Tom Fleming and on and on and on and on, they were pretty much traitors because they didn't believe that the United States should bomb the whole world and, force everyone to eat McDonald's and the like. And now the long-awaited link-up of Frumism and Spencerism is complete, which I don't know. That could be one of the signs of the apocalypse, right? Now I'm worried. More than a little worried here. Let's take a look at the chat. Media Hit says, also sporting an eye patch. KMG up to 75. Up to 75. What? Richard should run for office as a Democrat, says Oscar Toe. My Trail of Disgrace says, Spencer's ex Nina Byzantina bears a certain resemblance to Marina Abramovich in her extreme features, minus the plastic surgery. I don't know very much about this Nina Byzantina woman. I've seen pictures of her. She's a broad-featured woman, I suppose you could say. Matt Beck says, we need a montage of a dapper Russian soldiers standing next to their Z tanks played over ZZ Top's sharp-dressed man. Physiognomy is real. British American reminds us. Indeed, it is. That's not my formulation, but there we have it. Ian Durham makes a claim about Spencer that I'm not going to repeat. Jean Betard de Prescariat says, I want to allow all single childless Ukrainian women to immigrate to the U.S. to help solve the incel problem. I was thinking one curious result of this influx of refugees from the Ukraine would be that for a change, there will be white people immigrating to Canada and the United States. But then I started reading these stories about Iraqi gay and trans people somehow ending up in Ukraine. They are going to be given priority. Make no mistake about it. Meatyhead says, my favorite kill stream was Boogie versus Frank Hassel. It led to Hassel going to his house and getting a gunshot adjacent to him. She's half Georgian, half Russian, says my trail of disgrace of Nina Byzantina. And is she, I've seen her described as Russian Canadian. Can anyone explain that? Or to adapt an old joke, King of the Hill, these days, anyone who has a layover at Pearson Airport can claim to be Canadian. I see, according to her site, Nina Kuprianova, which is her actual name, she has a PhD in history from the University of Toronto, focusing on modern and contemporary Russia, culture, and U.S. foreign policy. Well, I guess it takes several years to get a PhD. So she was in Toronto for several years. Media Hit says the kill streams I've seen involved Richard Spencer and another with a groiper as that creep who gave the Cuties show a positive review. Media Head says, oh yeah, I saw the kill stream with KMG. I got asked to do it. I did it. Then I had a bunch of people complaining that Ethan Ralph is a very, very bad man and that apparently he has done bad things to women. I have no idea. No idea about that. Who is Michael Sisko? Asks Oscar Toe. Indeed. Spencer bores me to death, says Quachulango. He really is a ridiculous character. I know something about him from the beginning, before he was famous, when he first went to Washington. And it was clear from, I used to know a lot of people in the metro area, journalists. And they told me about Richard Spencer. And I believed he shared accommodation with one or more journalists. And it was clear that he was a provocateur right from the very beginning, in particular, a racial provocateur. To what end? I don't know. And Enron says, Kevin is wasting his and our time talking about Dickie Spencer. He is a joke with no influence. Well, yeah, I don't talk about him very often, but occasionally I just, the idea of him campaigning against the fringes, and the word has come from the mountaintop. Richard Spencer is delivering the approved line on Ukraine is just so very funny. So very, 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 very funny. And let's see, let's change the subject as well. Alex Berenson is writing a lot about Ukraine. I'm not going to go into that. But no, it's just the COVID-19 narrative collapsed. Support for the vaccines collapsed. And no, we're not going to talk about that. It's like, a dyspeptic, a crying baby. What do? Well, one old trick is to grab your keys and dangle them in front of the baby. Look, it's something shiny and it makes a noise, and that often works. And the Ukraine imbroglio, there's a lot to do with that. Let's just jangle the keys in front of the fractious baby. Let's have a look at dailyskeptic.org. And yes, apparently, COVID-19 is still out there, but we've moved on. We've moved on. Take off the masks, even with mandates fully waived. Healthy Manhattanites show a seemingly inexhaustible appetite for fear and risk aversion, writes Heather McDonald in a City Journal. U.S. bans Russian oil imports amid pandemonium at the pumps in Britain. Well, clearly, we're at the position now where only rich people will be able to drive cars in Europe. Or, alternatively, you can drive a car, but you can't do anything else. Oil prices, gasoline prices are shockingly high in Europe compared to America. Now, this is interesting. Smokers are not a burden. There follows a guest post from John Stadden, professor of psychology and professor of biology and neurobiology emeritus at Duke University, which is an extract from chapter 4 of his book, Unlucky Strike, Private Health and the Science, Law, and Politics of Smoking. I've discussed the morality of smoking, its supposed lethality, its addictiveness, and its effects on non-smokers. The evidence shows that if smoking is a sin, it is a pretty venial one, nor is smoking as lethal as its critics charge and many smokers imagine. The health effects of passive smoke are almost impossible to measure. The best attempts have failed to find significant effects. Fact check, true. This chapter deals with the most serious policy-related charge against smoking, that it costs non-smokers money. Smoking has a public cost. Smoking-related disease is a profound burden on our national healthcare system, writes Judge Kessler. As we've seen, the National Socialists agreed, all those lost Volkswagens. Smoking imposes a huge economic burden on society, currently up to 15% of total healthcare costs in developed countries, says an article in the British Medical Journal in 2004. The case seems unarguable. A substantial fraction of smokers die of smoking-related illnesses. Treating illness, especially if the treatment is protracted and often ineffective, as it is with COPD and many cancers, is always expensive. But obvious is not always correct. The smoking costs us folk seem to forget, brace yourself, that we all die, even non-smokers. As the bumper sticker reminds us, eat right, exercise, die anyway. The facts about the healthcare costs of smoking are, in fact, the opposite of the common preconception. For the 24 to 50-year age range, smokers cost a bit more. Thereafter, they cost quite a bit less because smokers die a bit earlier than non-smokers. Overall, smoking actually saved the Medicare program money, $2,800 per male smoker age 24 and $600 per female, concluded Sloan and his colleagues from a database up to 2002. Data gathered since, which I discuss at more length in a moment, confirms this conclusion. Smokers save money on healthcare costs. Silverberg, using a different set of data, concludes similarly in the appendix. I remember many years ago about Enoch Powell, when he was Minister of Health in the Macmillan government. That was the only ministerial post he ever held. There was a common misconception about the National Health Service when it was introduced after World War II, that there was a miasma of ill health that was affecting Britons. And this was because of lack of treatment. That when when the NHS was brought in and there was universal health care, free health care for all, then it would be as if a swamp had been drained. So people would be healthier and money would be saved. Well, people finally realized, or I know that some people still don't understand this, people who are cured of sickness live to get sick again. And every life ends with death. And something like 50% of all of lifetime medical costs for any one person are typically expended in the last 6 months of life. So yes, if smokers die earlier, they save an enormous amount of money, both in medical costs and in pension costs. Also, smokers contribute enormous amounts of money through the taxation on tobacco. But no, we've all persuaded ourselves of something that is simply not true. I would nice to see an actual debate on this, but the movement against the anti-smoking movement reminds me a lot of what we're going through now. It was simply promulgated that smoking is a terrible evil, that smokers are bad people. They must be punished in myriads of ways. They must be driven out of society. And apparently, New Zealand has decided that it's going to ban smoking entirely. But were people happier when most people smoked as opposed to now, when they're all on antidepressants or other mind altering drugs? I would suggest that they were. There's a camaraderie associated with smoking, which has been lost to us. This is a sad story I'm going to talk about now, and others will find it horrifying or that it will make them angry, but this is the way we live now. This is from Brandon M. Showalter. I'm gutted, I tell you, gutted. I just met a mom originally from El Salvador whose teen daughter got sucked into the gender madness in California. Mom did everything she could to help her daughter. The school, the medical establishment, and the Department of Social Services undermined her at every turn. They went so far as to remove her custody. Naturally, they all pulled the "if you don't support your child and allow them to medicalize, they'll kill themselves" card. Now separated from her mom, the cross-sex hormones kicked in, but of course it didn't alleviate her daughter's distress. The daughter wound up taking her own life by throwing herself in front of a train near Los Angeles. This anguished mom had to get a phone call from the cops telling her they were picking up the pieces of her daughter's shattered body. This mom's agony is so deep, she says it now hurts to breathe. The torment in this mom's eyes will haunt me for a long while. I could barely hold the tears back on the metro on the way home. To those of you hesitant to raise your voice on this insanity, what are you waiting for? I will post the video of this as soon as it is available. And this is at Thread Reader, again, Brandon M. Showalter. Something close to 20% of youths or Zoomers in America now claim to be alphabet people. That's significant in a way, but it's insignificant in another way because, oh, you're not one of those boring people. You're not a boring woman. This affects women more than men, actually. You're not one of those boring women who just likes to have sex with men. No, of course I'm not. I'm gender liquid. Oh, you're gender liquid. Oh, good. Glad to know you're not one of those boring people. Because increasingly we see, and it's this all over Wikipedia, it's hilarious. So-and-so came out as gender liquid. Some actress, some internet influencer or whatever. And then, she is married to such and such a man and has one or more children. Oh, but you're gender liquid. Are you? Again, what these people are saying is, oh, I'm not one of those. Now, what is the Venn diagram of the people who define themselves as alphabet people and those people who are diagnosed or more often self-diagnosed as suffering various forms of mental illness? No, sorry, we're not supposed to use that. Neurodivergence, we call it now. Have you heard of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, which is just terribly, terribly wicked? Well, of course, this is another made-up story. Of course it is. This is from Deadline. Disney boss Bob Chapek says company won't slam Florida's Don't Say Gay bill directly, but still committed to inclusion. And there's a fairly long story here about how the many alphabet people employees at Walt Disney World in Florida are they're just traumatized by this. And I don't know, Disney should declare war on the state of Florida, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is just horrible. So what does, it's not called the Don't Say Gay bill. Okay. What is it? Florida schools, it means there is no talk of gay identity and trans identity and all the rest of it until after grade 3. So you don't get it in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. That's it. That's all it says. No one is being, forbidden to say gay in schools, but they lie. These people lie. They always lie. They can't stop lying. And of course, as the head of MI6 revealed, what was it, last week, that one of the main reasons why we have to turn Ukraine into a charnel house is because of alphabet people. Yeah. Apparently, Vladimir Putin is not all that keen on the alphabet people. And, you can't propagandize children to be homosexual or trans or whatever, gender liquid, in Russian schools, and that's the worst thing in the world. Public intellectuals are rubbish, with very few exceptions. I suppose the public intellectuals who appear on television the most are the worst. And I don't want to particularly make this a racial thing, but the very worst so-called public intellectuals on TV are black, because the standards for being a public intellectual in the United States, particularly if you're black, are low. They're quite low. You've heard of Professor Crunk? Yes. There's a leading black public intellectual, a woman who teaches somewhere in the United States, who calls herself Professor Crunk because she is getting down. She has a PhD in getting down. There's a story from last week from Jackson Richmond at Mediaite. Appearing on The View Friday, the Nation Justice correspondent Eli Mistal called the Constitution, quote, kind of trash, unquote. Mistal released Tuesday his first book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. I love this book so very much, said View co-host Sonny Hostin. The first chapter, Canceling Trash People is Not a Constitutional Crisis. Chapter 9, The Taking of Black Land, was another favorite of mine. And Reverse Racism is Not a Thing. I just think it's fantastic. View host Ana Navarro asked Mistal, some will say, are you arguing for throwing out the Constitution? Should the Constitution be thrown out? What do we do? Is it a living document or a sacred document? Mistal replied, it's certainly not sacred. All right, let's start there. The Constitution is kind of trash. Again, let's just talk as adults for a second. You notice what he did there? The Constitution is trash. Let's talk as adults. Okay. After Joy Behar asked Mistal to repeat what he said, Mistal reiterated that the Constitution is kind of trash. It was written by slavers and colonists and white people willing to make deals with slavers and colonists. He continued, they didn't ask anybody who looked like me what they thought about the Constitution. It was written without the consent of black and brown people in this country and without the consent of women in this country. Behar asked Mistal if he wants to rewrite the Constitution. I could, right? Replied Mistal, I could write parts of it in a tweet. Yeah, that's how stupid this man is. He's justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, and he's native of Haiti. Ana Navarro is a native of Nicaragua. And this is more proof for the proposition that immigrants should not be allowed to vote. Say two. No, not allowed to vote. Now, I don't know what is stranger about this appearance of Mistal on this show, that as per usual, he is wearing what seems to be a gigantic freight wig. But then we have full-figured gal Ana Navarro, who on that show was wearing a distressed T-shirt that said Ukraine on it with a Ukrainian flag, and it was thoroughly distressed. And so did she buy it distressed? Because it couldn't have gone through very many washings, because nobody cared about the Ukraine until, a couple of weeks ago. But she was wearing this like it was a Nirvana concert souvenir, circa 1972. More on Eli Mistal, one of America's top public intellectuals. And this is from David Rutz at Fox News. A far-left guest on The View sounded off on President Biden's State of the Union remarks, pouring cold water on the defund the police movement, saying Friday that Biden was admitting he didn't care about reform. Quote, let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice, Biden said on Tuesday. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police, fund them with resources and training they need to protect our communities. Ms. Dahl, correspondent for The Nation and frequent MSNBC guest, fumed Biden was trying to be nice in his address and suggested cops on the street would still be just as likely to kill African Americans for no reason, regardless of funding. For no reason. That is a bold claim. Now, you can claim that cops kill black people on the streets for poor reasons, for bad reasons, but for no reasons. So they're death squads, in other words. This is the claim that Eli Mistel is making. Quote, he's just trying to be nice. That really, I think, goes wrong when you talk about the other big missed opportunity, which was Mr. Fund the Police. Can we just talk as adults? What is that, his catchphrase? Does anybody in good faith think that the problem with police brutality in this country is that the police aren't funded enough? Mistel then sarcastically wondered aloud if there was a cop in the street saying, I was going to let that black man live, but I just didn't have the funding and the training to understand what humans look like. Oh, so now we're at the level of genocide, are we? Mistel said Tuesday that Biden's comments were what whites want to hear. This fellow doesn't seem to be very grateful from not living in that hellhole Haiti any more. This is really this sort of talk is in you're looking for reprisals. That apparently white police are death squads, that they kill black people indiscriminately for fun. And this kind of talk has serious consequences, bad consequences. But he gets away with it because he is a public black intellectual. And you can't be mean to those people. Finally, this isn't just the west coast of Canada and the United States. I've seen recent pictures, video of Canal Street in New York City. And, is this supposed to be the first world? Doesn't look like the first world. This is from Elizabeth McSheffrey at Global News. We don't have all the answers, Deputy Police Chief, on rise of unprovoked attacks in Vancouver. Vancouver is the city where I spent most of my life. I'd still be living there, except for the fact that most people don't speak English there anymore. And it's become a city because of globalism and our insane immigration policy in Canada, where essentially you have to be rich or destitute to live in Vancouver. No one in between is allowed. Over more than 3 decades as a police officer, Howard Chow says he's never seen anything quite like the staggering number of unprovoked assaults on strangers in Vancouver. It's an alarming set of extraordinary incidents, and there is no quick and simple way to crack down on the problem, the Vancouver Deputy Chief Constable told Global News. Oh, there isn't? We don't have all the answers. We'll stay in our lane. What does that mean, we'll stay in our lane? Why would you say something like that? I know other people say it. What is the context here? Staying in the lane. Oh, crime is out of control. Random, brutal crime is out of control in Vancouver, but we'll stay in our lane. But oftentimes we're seeing these things before anyone else is, and we want to make sure it's out there, raise the awareness, sound the alarm bells. No, you are not seeing this before anyone else is. People who actually walk the streets of Vancouver are seeing this before anyone else, and they've been seeing it for quite a few years now. According to the Vancouver Police Department, an average of 4 people are the victims of random groundless attacks by unknown suspects in the city every day. The figures don't include bar fights, robberies, incidents of road rage, or other assaults where the individuals are known to each other. Incidents of road rage are where the individuals are known to each other? Robberies known to each other? Chow recounted extreme examples, including a suspect who took a swipe at someone who refused to give them a cigarette, then stabbed someone in the face at a sushi restaurant before punching a woman in the face at a bus stop. These are the incidents that I've seen over and over again, Chow said. We're finding there are repeat offenders on this. You think so? His comments come within days of a particularly egregious crime spree. One man allegedly attacked 5 women within 40 minutes last Saturday. The previous weekend, Vancouver police said they responded to 60 separate assaults, 22 of which were random. The VPD is diving into the data now, Chow added, and discovering that some of the perpetrators in the city have records of between 200 and 500 previous police interactions. The VPD knew all about this years ago. And who are these people? Characterized as homeless, perhaps? Characterized as mentally ill, perhaps? Part of it is, having to deal with the COVID restrictions similar to everyone else, Chow explained. Yeah, sure. The criminal justice system has had to make modifications as well. Certain people that may end up in jail aren't ending up in jail. We've got backlogs that are taking place. Chow said social policies play a role too, in particular, a lack of long-term housing in combination with wraparound care available around the clock for those most in need. When people are saying we've got wraparound care, well, no, you don't. At 3 o'clock in the morning, that wraparound care is a 24-year-old desk clerk who's dealing with someone screaming and yelling in his or her room. Where is the psych nurse that's going to go upstairs and diffuse and deconflict and deal with that instance? In other words, the Vancouver police have decided they're not going to enforce the law anymore. And of course, the city government of Vancouver has decided to give stuff like free housing to the worst people in society, the very worst people in society. And let's get the psych nurses there because, if you have a psych nurse dealing with a deranged individual, that individual is not going to clobber the nurse over the head or push her over a balcony or stab her because she's a psych nurse, unlike a policeman. Of the police calls involving a mental health component, Chow added, 84% involve violence, danger, or criminality, and 12% involve weapons. 26% of the calls come from healthcare providers in need of police assistance. But the thing to do is to remove the stigma against mental illness. Yes. Because someone's screaming obscenities, why would we look down on someone who, stands in a public place and screams obscenities for a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, or whatever? Leave aside the psychic damage to everyone within hearing of this. No, we have to be nice to the crazy people. Vancouver has decided that they're going to be super nice to junkies. This policy goes back decades. And how would I say, Scumtown in Vancouver continues to move further and further west. It's pretty much reached Granville Street, and it's just going to keep occupying more of downtown Vancouver because everything that the city government has done, everything the police has done for decades now has been wrong. You see, when people have special designations, such as, neurodivergent or homeless or several others, they can't really be guilty of crimes. And it's really impossible to stop them wrecking the lives of everyone they come into contact with because they're special people. And that would be mean. So we'll final look at the chat. Don Imus, golly. I'm ruining my dinner by eating Criolla with cream cheese. Taco Girl is pissed, says Don Willis. Ogan's Iron says, stop by Edward Slavquat Substack. He chronicles the COVID thing in Russia. Hopefully it's all over. But they were going to a dark place with COVID-Vax policies. Quachalango says, eat real food. What do you mean by QR cult, Ogan, says Gamion? Do you have to show your smartphone for everything? I think that's what he means. On top of being neurodivergent junkies, most of them are natives of protective class, says Jim N-word. Most, I don't know, a lot of them certainly are. But given the vast amount of exposure and experience I've had with mentally ill drug addicts over the last 18 to 24 months. I don't, I can't speak for Vancouver because I don't live there anymore. The last time I was in Vancouver was a year ago, a year and a half ago, and I was shocked by the condition of downtown, just east of Granville Street. Much of it, and we're talking about near the ocean here. Streets like Dunsmuir Street and Hastings Street are abandoned. Abandoned storefronts and, oh yes, and tattoo parlors and check cashing places, all that sort of thing. It was a really, I was walking along near the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and I know Vancouver very well, and I just this low level of menace everywhere. Did you secure a new place to live, KMG, says Metal Mike? No, not yet, but I'll have to soon. Meatyhead says, which BC city do you like better, Vancouver or Victoria? That's a difficult one. I love Vancouver because I grew up there. All of my formative experiences were in Vancouver. Okay. And I know Vancouver very, very well, as I, grew up there from the age of 6. I've lived in Victoria for 20 years, but I'm never going to know Victoria as well as I know Vancouver. There's so many parts. I've lived all over Vancouver, and there's so many of the parts of the city, that are special to me because I have memories associated with them. And that's not going to happen in Victoria because you get to a certain age in life and experiences simply don't affect you in the same way. When I moved to Victoria in 2001, I had this strange deja vu experience that I thought, what's wrong here? Why does everything seem so familiar to me? Well, I just spent a few days of my life in Victoria, and then I realized that the Victoria of 2001 was like the Vancouver of 1971 in so many respects, in terms of demographics and crime and scale. It's gone enormously downhill. Victoria has since 2001, but of course Vancouver has gone enormously downhill in the same way, except that everything is even more expensive Vancouver than it ever has been. There are really no poor parts of Vancouver left anymore. Now, of course, you have social housing, which is an absolute menace, right? But, people have moved out, near the Pacific Coliseum. It used to be the dividing line in Vancouver was Cambie Street, and you did not want to live east of Cambie Street. If you lived east of Cambie Street, you would keep that secret because people would think, well, you're a failure. Because why aren't you living west of Cambie Street with all the good people? That doesn't apply anymore. There is just so much money in Vancouver now that all of it is rich now. Hello to Giant Art Productions. And Jim Edwards says Victoria is much more white. This is true, but it's changing and changing fast, incredibly fast. Is there anyone else here? I think Putin played 4D chess with Schwab, says Gamillion. Wait, the 7 black people in Vancouver have started a war on Asians, says Okansar. There's many more than 7 black people in Vancouver. There were about 7 black people in Victoria when I moved here in 2001. That's a slight exaggeration, but not by much. One could go days without seeing a black person on the street. That is no longer true. An enormous amount, a relatively enormous amount of black people are being brought in from Africa into Victoria. And of course, this is led primarily by the Anglican Church, but also by the Catholic Church in Victoria. Now, none of these people are going to be Catholic or Anglican, but, they're just doing it because they feel it here. They feel a need to take a country which has been good to them and destroy it. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, always gratefully appreciated. My PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.